Okie dokie, it is live. Hello, everyone. Hope you are doing very, very well. It's been a little while since I have done an interview on my YouTube. Not too long, but I think a few months sounds about right. But today we're joined by Gabriel. Is it Wyner?
It's Wyner. Yep,
Wyner? Gabriel Wyner. How are you, Gabriel? Or do you go by Gabe?
both. But Gabe
Both.
is good.
Gabe is good.
Uh,
Okay.
I am doing fine. This is the most busy I've ever been in my life, and I've been busy before, but
Oh
this
yeah.
is
What do
yeah.
you have going on?
I mean, I'm running a startup.
Mm.
I've managed to have days that are now so busy that I've managed to start up, go straight to my computer from bed at 7 a.m., work until 9 p.m., and then realize that I have not had time to get dressed for the day.
That's crazy.
And then I have to go to sleep. And I've never had that before. I'm just like, wow, that's the most busy I've ever been in my life. Okay,
That's
great.
crazy.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
yeah,
been
we'll get
nuts.
into that. It'll be interesting to hear kind of what you're working on. So basically, what I wanted to do is for the people watching, I wanted to first of all just learn a little bit more about Gabe here. So we'll spend some time talking about that, and then I really want to dig into your app as well.
Sure.
That's coming out a little bit later. So I think a good place to start is to rewind a little bit. So Gabe, where are you? I guess where are you from originally? Let's start there.
Los Angeles.
Los Angeles.
Yep,
Nice. And is
born and
that where
raised.
you are right now?
I am now in Chicago.
In
It's
Chicago.
I spent, let's see, 20 years in LA, bounced over to Vienna, Austria for 6 years,
Hmm.
then came back to LA for a couple years, and then moved to Chicago with my wife for she's pursuing med school here, and I'm mobile. So
Interesting. And what
yeah.
would be like one really random thing that, let's say in your childhood, that was like you love, like something super random that from your childhood, you're like, yeah, I was really into X.
Nuclear power.
Okay.
That was my thing. I was really into. I wanted to be a plasma engineer, like a nuclear engineer that was focusing on plasma physics. That was my thing. That was like my thing. You
I'm
asked for
curious,
random.
why was that? Like, how did you get into, like, what was it that I guess caught your interest about nuclear, or what was it, nuclear engineering, you said?
Nuclear engineering,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's. I mean, it's neat. So it sounds lame to say. So I don't know. I feel like I need to get further in detail there.
Well, I guess what got
Uh,
you into it when you were a kid?
I was really into chemistry. I was good at it. I felt like
Mhm.
I had really good teachers in that, and I like loved that class. And as we started getting into like where energy comes from, they started covering nuclear physics a little bit, and just the scale of it like
Mm.
blew me away. And then I started like getting into like watching atomic bomb historical footage and be like, holy crap,
Interesting.
this is like so intense and big and just on a whole different scale from like, let's have a gasoline engine in our cars. And so, and just the promise of something like fusion power, where it's like we have these nuclear power plants that exist, but there's this other technology that if we could only completely figure out and like figure out just how to hold it, like it's like we know how to do it, we know all this stuff, we just need to like get it in a small space and hold it together, and then poof, all of our energy problems are solved for basically the foreseeable future. Like
And
that's
are people struggling with that, I guess, holding that energy just because of like technology, or is there like more government policy around like, or like things like that that are making it difficult? Like what are some of the challenges?
for nuclear fusion, it's less about government issues. Like nuclear fission, like the plants that we already have, there's a lot of cool technology there, and that is generally held back by public opinion and by legitimate safety concerns and by
Mm.
government stuff about that this stuff is producing fuel for nuclear bombs and all sorts of stuff. Like tons of problems there. But nuclear fusion is just a technology problem. It's a problem to solve, and if you can solve it, then we're done.
Hmm.
Like it's which is cool, like the idea of that kind of problem. And it's just a matter of you have this gas. It is so volatile in the sense that it is a magnetic gas. Like you're used to gases, but you're not used to gases where if you hold up a magnet to it, the gas sticks to the magnet. Like, or if you run an electric field through it, it acts differently. And if you run like a there's this it's this like I don't know, you can actually make plasmas in your microwave if you light a match in there. And like you have
Interesting.
this big glowing ball in your microwave, and like this is a thing you can see and it'll ruin your microwave, but that's okay.
Is that dangerous?
Not tremendously, no. I mean, you might break your microwave. Sorry, Chicago. But
That's okay.
I don't know. It really just excited me that this is I liked problem solving. I was always really into problem solving. It's
Hmm.
why I wanted, like, I wanted to be an engineer, all this stuff, and it was because of problem solving. And that was a
Hmm.
really neat problem to think about
Right.
because it's cool to look at and it's cool to just think about the consequences of it, and it's challenging, and the idea of this problem that no one has been able to completely solve but people are
Hmm.
making steps to for 50 years now is like was really exciting to me as a teenager.
Hmm. For sure. And then you went on to study engineering in college, correct?
Yes, I ended up double majoring. I did mechanical engineering and opera, and the opera thing was kind of a hobby in high school, and then I kind of thought that it would be wacky to do both, and then it sort of took over. So that's how
Interesting.
that,
So you
that
said double
happened.
major opera and mechanical engineering.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
So I'm curious, actually. Do you still sing opera?
I don't. It's
No.
over. Yeah, yeah. And I'm like I'm kind of really happy about it.
How come?
I liked opera from a creation angle and a self-improvement angle. Opera was very, like, singing in general is extremely addictive from a self-improvement angle. You get better very rapidly, and it's very personal, in the sense that if you're getting better at the piano, for instance, like, yes, you are acquiring a skill, but in some sense it feels like it's external to you.
Got it.
Like I was a violinist for since I was like 5, and I played the violin and all this stuff, but like um, I like it was still outside of me a little bit. It was like, yes, I could do this, but like, here's this thing out here. Where the singing was like, I'm making myself a better organism.
Hmm.
Like myself is better from week to week, and I can hear it, and I can see it, and I can feel it. Like it feels easier, it sounds better, like all this stuff. Um, so that's addictive in singing, and that continued to be addictive in singing. But the thing I sort of fell in love with and decided, oh, maybe I should do this for my career, was the creative aspect more than it was the performance aspect. I didn't necessarily like being on a stage and like, hey, everyone, look at me. Like for some people, that really drives them. In my case, the thing that really drove me was I'm going to make something that no one's ever made before.
Hmm.
Like I'm gonna, like, yes, someone came up with this music, but I'm gonna interpret it in a way that's completely new. I'm gonna be interacting with all these musicians around me, and we together are gonna create something new, and that feels great. Like that creation process is, I think, what attracts a lot of people to music,
Hmm.
and that was sort of what brought me in that direction.
Interesting. So was there a point where you're considering making like using some of the singing and the opera and the music and actually creating a career from that?
Not anymore, no.
Okay.
The opera career is like the creation thing is great, and like there's ways of getting that.
Hmm.
um there's actually some groups in it. There's a group in LA called the Crunchies, which is awesome, where they find like super crunchy a cappella music, in the sense that it's like these like really dissonant like jazz a
Hmm.
cappella pieces with like 8-part harmony, 12-part harmony, and they get a group of like 12 studio musicians together who are really good at sight reading,
Yeah.
and they all get together in a room and they get new music out they've never seen before that's really hard, and then they work on it until they make something that sounds cool, and then they never do it again. Like all they do is sight reading. It's just hard
Yeah.
sight reading together until you make something, and then you're done. And like that group is awesome, and it's an amazing group, and I only got to really do it twice, and I got too busy. um, but it's not about performance, it's about let's create something, and like
Mhm.
you can get that without a career. And the career thing adds this element of like, I need to not only I need to get other people to agree to pay me to create. And I need them to, or else I will not be able to pay my bills.
Mhm.
And those aspects, like putting those ingredients in, especially in a career where there is like one slot for every 100 qualified people,
Right.
is just brutal.
Mhm.
And I think there's this other aspect to it as well, where like it's the same deal in most of the arts. Like that's sort of a known thing with the arts. It's
Yeah.
like you got one job
Yeah.
for every 100, something like that,
Mhm.
maybe 5 jobs for every 100. But like in like ballet, for instance, which is like I think equally competitive. Um, if you haven't made it in ballet by the time you're like 22, then the general messaging is, well, I guess that's over. But find another career or go learn how to teach or something like that. The deal with the opera thing is if you aren't taken seriously at all until you're 30,
Okay. So that's
so you
almost,
have
in a
this.
lot of ways, it could almost be considered as worse because it's not like you're 22 and then you're done and you have time to figure it out. You're almost like, and 30 is young too. Like, let's get it. Let's be like real. Like you're
But
in
no,
a,
it's not that it's not that you're if you haven't made it by the time you're 30, then you're done. It's you aren't even taken seriously
well,
until you're 30,
that's exactly what I mean, right?
and
Because
it's
then it
like
makes it hard.
42. It's 42 when you're over the hill with singing. So like yeah, like trying to start your life over, like, exactly as you're saying, trying to start your life over, and you're 42 is terrifying. Like it's really brutal. Like that career is so hard. And so the idea of being able to get a lot of my needs met in terms of that creation aspect and finding them in other places and finding them in writing, which is what it ended up happening. Was
Writing
such a
as
real
in writing as in books, writing
yeah,
music, writing what?
as in books.
Okay.
That finding that outlet and being like, oh well, this is giving me the same, this is fulfilling the same need I have, but I'm getting paid for it.
Yeah.
And I don't have to wait. I don't have to wait till I'm 40 something to figure out whether this is going to work or not.
Right.
So those things have we're fortunate. I feel really fortunate to have found that thing.
Interesting.
I'm gonna stay. Should I? I can stay live and run that way and let my dog out, or I can take the phone with me and let my dog
I guess show us your dog.
out. All right, sure. Because Norbert is not gonna stop. Um,
Norbert.
this is Norbert. He is Instagram famous.
Hi, Norbert.
Hey, Norbert, time for you to go out. Um, but yes, so I will be on the couch until he comes back.
No worries.
But yeah, yeah, that was the opera thing. It's I'm glad to be out in the sense of it being a career. At some point, I will come back into singing as a thing that I enjoy.
hmm
I did get a little burnt out on it, so it's going to take me a little while to come back in.
Right. Did you, so after you graduated college, did you go direct, I guess, what did you do work-wise right afterwards?
So I spent 6 years in college doing the two majors.
Yep.
Once I graduated, I got into a master's program in Austria for opera and for song and for singing because they split all of those up into three different majors. And so I went to the Conservatorium Wien, the private conservatory of Vienna, to get master's degrees in song, opera, and singing. And
And that was
I
after 6 years in the States, correct?
correct.
Got
And
it.
so I spent 6 years doing those over in Vienna.
Got it. And then
Uh,
what happened after you got your master's?
So about 2 years before the master's finished, I sold my book. Trying to think, is that the right timing? I think it is. Yeah. Um, yeah, I sold it about 2 years before the finish date. And so I became an author suddenly, and then that was my career. And before that, I was sort of teaching English on the side and trying to sing and trying to finish my master's and all this stuff. And then I full-time started writing, and then I full-time started being a Kickstarter founder person.
Right. So I guess
Uh,
was this during your master's? Was after your master's you wrote the book Kickstarter?
this was during the book was the last year right before the
Okay.
master's finished. So I started writing the book in 2012. I think I finished my master's like at the end of 2013.
Okay.
So let's get that set up again. Cool. Um, so so yeah, let's see. 2012 started the book. I mean, sold the book and started it. Started writing it. Finished writing it by 2013. It came out by 2014. and I was graduated by 2013
Right.
and moved back to LA by then.
So when you wrote that book, was it your plan to go, I want to write this book and I want to really try and become an author and like actually live off of this?
No, 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 no. It came randomly. I was basically just really, really active on the language learning subreddits.
Yep.
And I had come up with a method for learning languages that was really, really effective in 2010. And I tested it with French, and it was like really, it blew me away in terms of how rapidly I could learn. That was my third language at that time. And I started responding to people who were like, "Hey, how should I do this?" And I was like, "Well, I think you should do this. Like this totally worked for me. Try this thing." And so I had this post that I started writing in response to a lot of common questions, because like the language learning subreddit, like there's a lot of specific questions, and then there's just a lot of general. How do I learn German? How do I learn French? What's the best way? And it's the same question in some sense over and over again. And so I formulated a response to that. My response to that question. And then I started expanding on it, being like, well, and this, and then this happened, and then this happened. And it started getting a lot of upvotes. And I thought, and eventually it got like best of'd or something. And then I posted it over to Life Hacks, and it did really well there because it turned into this like 3-page comment. And I thought, well, if it's jumping, like doing so well on Life Hacks, like what about Lifehacker? Like this is a blog I really like. This is a blog that has a ton of people. Why don't I pitch it there? And I pitched it, and I didn't get a response. And then I pitched it like 5 more times to 5 different writers there. And one of them said, "Okay, I'll publish this tomorrow." And she did, after a no sleep night of re-editing it. And it blew up. So I had a publisher offer within 2 hours of it going live. And it had 50,000 views by then. And at this point, it's
And
like
so your book went live, or what went live?
This article, this basically
An
this
article.
redone version of the Reddit post.
Got it. Okay.
The article went live, and it got eventually 1.5 million views. And suddenly I had publishers contacting me being like, "I want to buy your book." I'm like, "Okay."
Right.
And so I started calling agents in New York being like, "Hey, I have a publisher offer. Do you want to take 15%? Like, let's do this." And my master's thesis actually was on language learning. It was on this method that I come up with because I thought it was going to be really applicable for singers. And I figured that someday maybe I'd write about it for a general audience. And this just accelerated that process way faster than I expected. And I really didn't think of it as a career. I sort of thought of it like, this seems cool. People should know about this.
Yeah. Interesting.
So
I guess how much of a lot of this was, I guess, if you had to go percentage, what percent would you go? A lot of those early, obviously you've got different projects now, I assume, but if you look at a lot of the early successes, you look at the Reddit posts, the original article for Life on Life, was it like Life Hacks or Life Hacker?
Life Hacker.
On Life Hacker, you started to reach out to publishers and all of those things, right? I guess what percentage of that would you say was stuff that just, I guess, happened, quote unquote, and how much would you say was, I don't know, strategy is the right word, but I guess by design to go like, hey, you were doing this thinking that maybe it'll lead to something?
60-40. 40% thinking it might go somewhere. I mean, there was this sort of thought of like, well, maybe this could do something cool. Like, I wonder what happens if. I think at the time, I remember I was but when the Reddit posts were going live, I had a website. It's called Tower of Babelfish.
Cool.
And I put up some like videos I did about English pronunciation that were like in detail, because that was the first ingredient of this method, was like learn pronunciation really well. And I thought they were good videos and I wanted people to see them, and I made a little Anki deck.
Yep.
And the Anki deck was for the International Phonetic Alphabet, and I put it up on my website, and I put up a little web shop that was like, here's the Anki deck, it's $3. Come watch these videos, and at the end of the videos, like, this is a deck that will help you remember everything in the videos. And like, people were buying it, and I was like, this is cool. Like, I'm getting a side stream of income, and like, side stream of incomes when you're an opera singer and like dying from no income in Vienna was like, this is cool. Like, maybe I'm gonna make like $100 from this thing, and that will pay my groceries for a week. Like, that'll be so neat. So I think that was initially like neat to me, and then I think the life hacker thing came up, and I was like, well, maybe I can make like $400. Like maybe I could pay for a month of groceries. Like wow. Uh, but I mean, there was this idea of, maybe this will turn into a book. Maybe this might do something. There was in the thought process, but the idea that it would lead to like a tech startup or something, like no,
Yeah.
definitely not. No.
Yeah. Interesting. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's just interesting here. It's just interesting hearing a lot of the mentality behind it because I think, um, from so some of my initial impressions, like, I think I watched your I watched the video on your app page on the
Yeah.
I believe it's Indiegogo or Kickstarter, and I know because I think you're wearing that dress shirt. I think your hairstyle is a little different. Like it's a very like polished video as it naturally should be.
Yeah.
And that was my first, let's say the first time I'd seen what you look like and heard you, and so my initial thinking, which is interesting, in contrast to, for example, this conversation,
Yeah.
was that my initial thing, he's a business major,
Haha.
like this is kind of entrepreneurial dude, likes to sell stuff, like he's a language
No.
guy, he has a talent, mixing talents. I'm seeing his ads on Facebook, so I know there's something happening there that's smart. Like he's like there's a lot of stuff. And I was like, oh, like I made those kinds of connections,
Mm.
and it's interesting to hear that it almost sounds like a lot of it was based on a combination. Correct me if I'm wrong, but a combination of, on one hand, you liked it. Another hand, it was there's a lot of practicality to go. Oh, if I make an extra $100, I can pay for extra groceries. Like almost like not like, oh, I'm gonna have a tech startup, but like, hey, if I can sell a couple more, maybe I can. You use the grocery example. Maybe I can make this one small step or whatnot.
Yeah.
But
This is, yeah. I mean, this whole process is me falling into business things and being like, I don't know what I'm doing. Does anyone know what I'm doing? Can they help? So yeah, no, this has not been a methodical. I want to create a business empire, and it would be nice if this thing led to where I think it is heading. But that's definitely not been, yeah. Like I've needed to bring in the business people to be like, help. What am I doing here? Because like I sure don't know. But I do like it, and I think that I think one of the main driving thing. I would say there's two driving things. One of them is that I like this content. I could talk about languages all day, and it's just fascinating, as you know. Like it's
Mhm.
it's so cool. Like the idea that you can come and think in a whole new way. Like that's a thing that I am passionate about. Um, and then finding a way that can help people get there. That's new. Um, that's a thing that's really exciting. The idea of being able to sort of problem solve in this old, nuclear physics sort of way of just like we can problem solve our way towards a solid method for this thing. Like that's exciting. It's like crafting of a learning technique. Like that part feels really nice. Um, and then there's like this opera singer desperation aspect that was really handy, honestly, in this thing where I felt very scared financially. And the idea of, well, maybe someone will buy my $3 thing was like a big driver for me, where if I wasn't in that sort of dire need state.
As in like for money because of
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think I probably wouldn't have put in as much work into like that first website or that first article or the, oh my God, maybe we can get a book and that'll get us out of credit card debt. Like that, all those things, I think, pushed really hard in the direction of, well, if I see this opportunity, then how far does this go? Let's see where that goes.
Yeah.
Um, but mostly in like a problem solving manner of like, I can't pay my bills. How do I fix that? As opposed to, I see an opportunity here and let's look at the potential market and blah, blah, blah. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's more
Where
trying
are
to,
you
trying to,
working part time? Anywhere?
I was teaching English in an Austrian high school
Okay.
at the time. Yeah. So I think I put in maybe 20 hours a week, something like that. So part time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. But
Yeah.
still tough to live on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was, yeah, it was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So you wrote the book. That was the Fluent Forever book, correct?
Yes. That was the Flip Forever book.
Nice. And that was 2013, you said, if I remember correctly? or no?
I wrote it. I started writing it in 2012. I mean, I started writing the master's thesis in
Sure.
2011, but the actual book 2012. Sold the book in 2012.
2012. Okay.
And it came out 2014.
Okay. 2014. Got it.
Yeah.
And then what? So now we're in 2018. I guess what in those 4 years? What have you been up to? What happened in
Kickstarter.
those 4 years? And then yeah.
Full-time Kickstarter. 2013. Basically, like my editor when I was writing this book, we ran into this fight. I don't know. It's like first draft of my book. He was like, "Nope, I'm going to cancel your contract if you give me this again." Like,
Hmm.
and I wrote this super dense, terrible chapter on like the epiglottal fricative is made in the epiglottis, like
Right.
just jargon and junk.
Right.
And he was like, "Why did you do this? Like, why would you give this to me? And why are you writing about the epiglottal fricative? Who cares?" And I like my answer to that was like, well, this is important, and it's important because if you've sort of taken care of pronunciation ahead of time, then you've taken care of one of the main barriers to memory in language learning. If you can't, like the example I usually bring up is Hungarian. Like if you're trying to learn Hungarian and someone's like, "Oh, here's the word for camera, fénykép ez a gép," and you can't hold on to it because you don't know any of the sounds involved, and you don't like you aren't in a position to remember that word.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you handle pronunciation and it doesn't take long, you take a couple weeks of pronunciation, and then that word is a word that you can grasp, and now you're at a much better like starting point. That said, learn like my answer to that of like, oh well, here's the epiglottal fricative is like actually not a good answer to that. And my editor called me out on that. It was like, this is a bad answer to the thing you're trying to solve here. So what is a good answer? And I found research showing how to answer that question, which is that there are relatively simple tools you can make that will teach you pronunciation and teach your ears how to hear things that they couldn't hear before. There are studies done on Japanese adults to hear rake and lake. And I realized that the flashcard software I was using, Anki, can make these exact same tools that showed up in these research studies. The research studies, all they did was say, I'm going to give you one of these two words at random, rake or lake, and you tell me which one I said, and I'll tell you whether you got it right or wrong. That's as complicated as it got.
Mm-hmm.
So I built it for myself in like a few hours in Anki for Hungarian. I tested it out, and I learned more pronunciation out of that than I learned in like a half semester of French diction or Italian diction in opera school. And at that point, I realized that's my first, like, that's where I need to go with the book. And that's what needs to exist is like, this is an easy way through this thing. People don't have easy ways through pronunciation. It didn't take me that long to make it. So surely I could make it in other languages. So why don't I spend 6 months making that in a bunch of languages? And so I launched a Kickstarter in 2013 saying, hey guys, like I had a bunch of people who were on my mailing list, or like 500 people who said, hey, I want to learn more after the Lifehacker article. And so I emailed all them saying, well, I'm gonna launch this thing. I want to make these pronunciation trainer things. I want to try and raise $10,000. And that thing blew up. And so that raised $96,000. By the end of it, I ended up promising 65 different products instead of the original like 11 languages.
Mm-hmm.
As I started building them, I realized that they needed to be better than the first one I did in Hungarian. They need to be a lot more complex. And so I finished them like 3 months ago. I spent 4 years straight working on these things. Like all of my time plus all like and building a staff around it. And so it turned into this like 9-person company building these pronunciation trainers because they were that much work.
Mm-hmm. So I guess without going too far into that, like what kind of roles do the people have? Like, is it purely language people, or do you have different people for different things because you need
No, not like none of those are language people. The language people are like say an additional 100 people involved with the language stuff. But we needed just project management. We needed spreadsheet work. We needed emails answered because I was getting like 8 hours of emails a day to answer. And we needed customer service people, and we needed people to find translators. Like it just blew up. Yeah, it was just so much stuff. And so that finished 3 months ago, basically, or maybe a little more now. And so that's been my full-time job is Kickstarter.
Right. And that's your current focus still on the app, correct?
Well, no, that shifted.
Okay.
So in October, or no, in September of 2017, so a few months ago, the it looked like I was going to be done finally with the first Kickstarter. And I knew from 2012. I mean, I knew from the start of this thing, everyone is stuck. Like, if they're going to be using my method, they're going to be using my method with Anki, and Anki's hard. And Anki, the way I use it, is really hard.
So I guess for people who don't know, what's a quick 30-second on what Anki is? People who don't know.
Anki is a spaced repetition system, which is to say Anki is a computerized flashcard program. It is very customizable. You can do anything with it. The special thing about Anki is that you can make any flashcards you could possibly imagine, with sounds, with video, with anything. You can customize them in any possible way you can imagine, and that Anki will try to figure out when you're about to forget any piece of information and test you right beforehand. So they do this. There's an algorithm to try and figure out your forgetting point and test you right beforehand. So Anki ends up being this tremendously efficient way to take in data, but the data you take in is determined by how your flashcards are formed. And so what people usually do with something relatively simple, this is cat and this is shat, and we're just going to pair those two things together. And my method doesn't do that. I never use English on those flashcards. And if you're not going to use English, then you need to rely on images, you need to rely on sound clips, you need to rely on sentences with blanks in them, all sorts of stuff. And so that ends up making something that is relatively complicated, just in terms of the computer aspect of like using Anki. And that's been a problem from the start. There are a lot of people who I used to do workshops, like in 2012, I put on a lot of workshops showing people how to do this language learning method. And like I would do a 12-hour workshop, and 6 hours would be dealing with Anki's interface.
Right.
Of just how do you really use this program to really master a language. And that's too long. Like a 6-hour learning curve is too long. All these products I made for that first Kickstarter, like these pronunciation trainer things, they have a 45-minute installation tutorial. And like, that's not a product. Like that's unacceptable. You can't put a product out in the market and be like, okay, well, now let's get started. You have 45 minutes to learn how to install this. Like, So I knew from the start I needed to.
I find actually with a lot of apps, actually, it's a common one that I've come across. Apps I've downloaded that I've undownloaded because I just don't understand how they work.
Yeah, and like that's exactly where mine was like, this is too hard. I know it's worth it, and I can tell people it's worth it, but like that still doesn't make it feel comfortable. But a comfortable thing was possible. It was just expensive. And so by the time that I finally finished the first Kickstarter, I was like, all right, well, by then I had asked my audience, which had grown substantially. Like we had 25,000 customers by then. I asked them, what are your pain points? What's hard? And half of them came back with exactly what I expected, which is Anki's too hard to use in this way. Like, I love Anki. I've lived in Anki. I have 50,000 flashcards in Anki. Like, I don't have any problem with Anki. It's just that if you're going to use it with my method, and if you're going to really use it as a power user, it's hard. And it doesn't. That doesn't need to be when you're just learning languages, and you're just restricting your data to language, because language is always in a sentence. You're not going to find a language that isn't made out of sentences. So. So I launched a second Kickstarter, and that was the one that happened just a few months ago in September of 2017, and that blew up insanely. That we raised $250,000 in the first 24 hours.
Right.
And so that rapidly became the most funded app of all time, and then we doubled that record. We're about to triple that record, and we need to now go get investors, because that also is not enough money. Like, it is. And it isn't. Like, at this point, this is a full-blown tech startup. Like, today we've launched our hiring thing for 3 full-time programmers. Like, this suddenly I'm in a startup that has a burn rate and all this crazy stuff, and I need to learn what the word burn rate is, and I need to watch the show Silicon Valley so I can learn all this terminology and stuff. It's been such a life overturning set of events that it's been pretty nuts.
Interesting. Yeah. I want to transition a bit. So you've done, talk a lot of the business side, your life, and which is fascinating, by the way. And I feel like we could spend a lot more time on that, obviously. I guess what I'm curious about is, we've been skirting around the topic of your method, right? You talk about, you said on Reddit, you had this good method, you had a specific way that you learned French that worked. You obviously speak a bunch of languages. We'll get into that. Um, you've talked about pronunciation, I guess. Let's dig in a little bit. I guess, what are some of the, let's say, core beliefs around your method?
You got it. So I look at languages from a memory standpoint. There's this sense that like, oh, kids are really good at learning languages, and like we lose this thing, and the data doesn't support that. There's this great book from Lourdes Ortega that I used considered like a lot when I was writing my book, where she summarizes what we know about second language acquisition, and she covers this idea of this myth that like children, there's critical periods and children learn languages and then you lose it, and like it doesn't seem to be true. Like it's a little complicated, but for the most part, it doesn't seem to be true. That it's just that it's an optical illusion. It's that you look at kids that have 20,000 hours of exposure, but they're 5. So how could they possibly have learned much language by then? And yet they're better than you. So clearly they're better at language. But like once you correct for time, once you say, okay, adult with 500 hours of exposure, kid with 500 hours of exposure, the adults are faster at learning. And so it's not that we don't possess an innate ability to learn languages. Like
Are there studies that prove both sides, out of curiosity?
There's a sense, God, I just summarized this for someone because they were like, what's the real evidence? And I looked back in the Ortega's book and I was like, oh, this is a little more complicated than I recall. There are no studies showing that there's a critical period. Like that doesn't exist. The critical period doesn't exist. There is a critical period for pronunciation that ends at between 6 months and 12 months. So that exists.
Critical period meaning, like, I know what that is, but I guess for people that may not know, what does that mean?
This idea that if you're young enough, then you can do it, and if you're over past this timeline thing, some people say it's 7 years old. Once you're past 7, you can never learn a language well.
Got it. Yep.
This kind of thing, except that like you can never learn a language well unless you're an opera singer, and then you can because you're paid for it, like, or unless you're a professional translator, and then you can. Like, it doesn't, like, there's a logic problem there of why is it that singers, for instance, can come up with can learn good pronunciation, like, because that's sometimes the critical period thing is it'll be you can never learn a language, or well, obviously some people can learn languages, so you can never learn a good accent, but singers can, so unless you're a musician, like, logic falls apart. There is a period between the ages of 6 months and 12 months where your brain does shift. And you specialize. So you specialize in the phonetics of the languages that you're exposed to. So if you've been hanging around, people speaking Japanese half the time and people speaking English half the time, then your ears will be tuned to the sounds in those languages, and they will have harder times with sounds in Russian, for instance. Those will be hard to differentiate. That exists. There is a critical period there. That is, you can overcome it, but that exists. But beyond that, no, there doesn't seem to be a critical period. There's no time where past which you can't learn languages or you can't learn pronunciation. There are some studies showing that overall outcomes with children, with younger learners, tend to surpass overall outcomes with older learners.
Overall outcomes, as in, what do you mean?
Meaning how far they get in the end, when they are in an immersion environment, when they're living in a target.
So theoretically, a child in an immersion environment versus an adult in an immersion environment, overall, the child might make it further than the adult would. Is that generally what you're saying?
Yes, that's what some of these studies are showing. But as far as I can tell, what's really going on there is that the adults are insulating themselves. They're hanging out with English speakers, and the kids are not. And so this ends up still being a matter of exposure. You're talking about how many hours is the adult spending in the Spanish-speaking, for instance, environment versus the kid in the Spanish-speaking environment. And just because the adult lives in Spain doesn't mean they're in a Spanish-speaking environment. In every study that I've seen that actually accounts for time, the adult wins.
Right. So if the adult
all about time.
Right. So it's more like if the adult spends more, or let's say the adult and a child spend the same amount of time, generally speaking, unless there's some other factor we're not considering, the adult, generally speaking, will make more progress than the child would. And I guess why is that?
I mean, children are fearless. Like the adults are scared of feeling
Well, I guess,
stupid.
sorry,
Like
I'll rephrase. Why would the adults make more progress if assuming they put the same on?
okay,
I mean,
sure. Adults, like in the course of growing up, you learn how to store information better. Part of that is that you already have more memories to relate new information to. You can say, okay, well, like you just said fingerkeep as gape is the word for camera, but like, I've seen lots of cameras. I know what cameras are. I know a lot of things about cameras. Whereas the 2-year-old kid may not have never even heard of a camera before. Like you have more memories, and that means you have more points to connect to. There's that. There's also the fact that you develop learning strategies as you grow up because that's requested of you. So that means something. And if you try and explain some grammar rule to a 2-year-old kid, they will not have any idea what you're talking about. If you explain a grammar rule to an adult, they actually will improve faster because
yes,
they know what that means, they know how it works, and it allows them to take in more input. Is sort of where I land on that. The sort of there's like the comprehensible input argument thing, which I agree with. I think that learning grammar explicitly, the method through which that works, the reason why people learn faster when they know grammar explicitly, like this rule does this, is because they can see a new sentence and they can recognize more pieces of it. And they can take in a higher percentage of each sentence and understand it because they know that the end of this new word is familiar to them because it
yes,
matches the end of some other word. So adults have all these advantages on that front because they're smarter. Like they've learned to be smarter because they have more experiences and they've had more techniques. And kids don't have techniques; they just have lack of fear, which is a really good
which
technique.
is really good.
So it's yeah. I mean that's those are the two sort of balancing things. You have lack of fear versus like greater skill.
Right. And
Yeah.
so you mentioned a few times that for you, it's important to tackle pronunciation first. So
Yes.
talk to us a little bit about that.
I mean, this whole thing, like pronunciation is a part of a whole framework of memory, which is that they like if it is the case, if you take as not as a given, but if you follow the arguments that like adults are actually really good at this thing, and that this isn't a matter of like, oh, I have poor ability here, then what this really comes down to is memory. It's that if you're not immersed in the thing in the language and you don't have 18 hours a day to spend in it, because I've been in those programs and I watched everyone improve at the same rate. You can come in with whatever skill set you want, but everyone is going to improve rapidly when they're exposed to 18 hours of French a day. Like
Yep.
you can't not. You must
Assuming
improve.
it's done in a way where everyone's engaged. It's like you said, if
Yes,
you're insular and you're keeping yourself separate, it's very different, right? But yes,
right.
I agree with you.
Yeah, in these programs where you are forced to engage and you are forced to never disengage, everyone improves at a pretty constant rate, which is surprising to me. It was surprising to me a little bit, but that's not normal. But we don't live in immersion programs, and so what we do live in is I have 5 minutes today. I'm gonna go play with this thing on my phone, or I have maybe an hour of class 3 times a week. And at that rate, at 3 hours a week, at 6 hours max a week, um, you have a lot of time in between your lessons, and so you are very likely to forget content.
Yes, agreed.
Uh, there's no time to forget in an immersion program. There's plenty of time to forget in a college course, and there's even more time to forget in 15 minutes of Duolingo a day.
Yes.
And so then the real challenge, the problem solving thing, like what are the parameters of this problem? The parameters of the problem are forgetting. Like that's it. Like if we assume you have high ability, like that your brain is designed to take in language, all that stuff, then it's just how do we deal with the fact that you have 3 hours this week that you're going to spend on Spanish, and then all of the rest of the hours of the week that you're not, and forgetting the content that you learned in those first 3 hours. And so the whole method lives around that problem. And so the first solution to that problem is if you can't remember if you don't remember the sounds in that language, you're not going to be able to remember it. Everyone has the experience of going to parties and someone introduces themselves as like some set of sounds that you've never heard of because they're from not your native language. And then you can't remember their name. And you're like, can you please repeat that?
Hmm.
And they're like, Michkolz. And you're like, Mitchy,
Mitchell, what's up, Mitchell?
and like they can say it 10 times, and you're going to repeat it 10 times, and then you turn around and it's already gone. And like this is a common experience. Everyone has this thing, and now you're talking about a foreign language where every single word you want to know is another foreign person's name. And if you can't make that sound familiar and not foreign, then you're screwed from the start. So like that's the pronunciation thing, is that take care of that now, because you've got to take care of it at some point, and now is the right time for that. Also, you know, the idea of I have a really accents, you can only learn accents like, you know, at a certain age. Like, no, it's that if you don't learn accents in the beginning, then now you're practicing a bad accent 10,000 times, and then by the time you reach an advanced level in the language, someone comes and tells you, you know, you probably shouldn't say like taco, it's taco. And you're like, well, I've just said taco 7,000 times, but I guess I can try taco. Like you can maybe say it once, and then you're still going to fall back in your old habits. So like, yeah, old habits, breaking old habits is hard. But nonetheless, like all that argues towards like pronunciation in the beginning, yeah, take care of that. But the rest of the method lives in the same vein. It's about how do you maximize the how memorable each word is? How do you maximize how memorable each chunk of grammar is? How do you make the language memorable so that it's actually interesting to your brain instead of just junk that you're trying to rehearse enough that it sticks? And so that's kind of where everything that's
So
the unifying principle of this thing.
So I guess if I'm just to make sure I'm understanding, right? I'm just trying to absorb it myself. So it's going part one. Let's figure out the sounds. Let's make let's help you understand the sounds of XYZ language, whatever language, because without knowing those, there's no point knowing here's how to put a sentence together, here's how to do this, because your brain's not going to be able to fully absorb it.
Right.
Part two, then you're going, okay, you have limited time. So how are we making sure that with this limited time, every time you learn something, the way you've chosen to learn that concept is as, you know, as impactful or as memorable as, you know, impactful and memorable as possible, so that it's actually in your brain, so that you've got the pronunciation down. Now you're learning vocab or grammar or whatever. You've done it in a way where it's memorable, so now you can put it together with this pronunciation, and all of a sudden you can produce things, you can write stuff, you can understand. Am I in the right ballpark?
You're totally in the right ballpark. The additional ingredient there is also what is the most efficient path for keeping that long term.
Okay.
So you make something super, super memorable, but if you never repeat it again, then it's going to fall away regardless. Mm-hmm. It'll fall away slower, but it'll fall away regardless. And so that's where things like Anki, these spaced repetition programs, come in, where they're helping you find the most efficient repetition pattern, so that things really do stick, so that you don't forget it from week to week to week. So you're aiming for highly impactful stuff, so that you can maximize your time, but also like maximizing your time in terms of repetition as well.
Right. Got it.
And like that route towards having things that are really impactful, that ends up being without translation. And that's also sort of mirroring what we're actually trying to build here. Like when we're trying to build fluency in a language, like with this Finnkeep example, like with camera, you have millions of associations. You have iPhone cameras, you have the word shutter, the word photography, the sound of a shutter, like every picture you've ever taken, all that stuff is associated with camera, and none of that stuff is associated with Finnkeep. Like Finnkeep photographer is not a word that's associated with Finnkeep in your head, because you've never heard that word before. How could you have it associated? You know, the word for shutter, the word for like all these like these pictures of like what does a camera look like? Like iPhones are not associated with Finnkeep. And so if you're going to be setting up flashcards and connecting them, connecting the word camera to Finnkeep, you're not actually rehearsing the connections you want to build. The connections you want to build is that you think Finnkeep, and like that's the thing that like that a Finnkeep base uses. Yeah. And like that fits into a sentence in this particular way. Like that's all Hungarian connections.
Yep.
And so this idea of impactful memories, from my standpoint, that is best done entirely in the target language, at least in terms of what you look at on a daily basis. I'm fine with like, sometimes people peg me as like an anti-translation person. It's like translations are great the first time you see something, but times 2 through 100, those should all be in your target language. Like that's, if you're going to be efficient about it, like that's going to be your maximum efficiency route. So that's kind of the method in a nutshell.
Got it. So I guess we'll finish with these two questions. I guess question one is, how do I phrase this? Do you think, so we talked about, about your method. I think, if we had 5 hours, I'm sure we could go really deep, but obviously I'm not going to.
Totally could, yes.
But for time's sake, I guess we have this method. I feel like I understand it. Makes sense to me. Do you think that, it is, how do I phrase this question? Do you think it's let's say the best method, or do you think that, this is the method that works better than maybe other theories or other systems? Or do you think it really is maybe more individual, or maybe there are other factors to look at where there could be other things that work for a specific individual for whatever reason?
I think that I was really careful when writing the second version of my book to not just put out a how-to method on how to do Gabe's thing, because I don't want people to go do Gabe's thing. I mean, I think my method at this point has been relatively well refined. I've now used it over 4 or 5 French.
Right. And sorry, actually, I'm going to interrupt for a second. Is your method, is there like, this is probably a good point to make actually, for your specific method, is it almost a framework that could be implemented a variety of different ways? Or is it more of, hey, here's like certain things you should be doing for it to work? Does that make sense? I'm not sure if that makes sense. Like think of like comprehensible input, okay? Right, like comprehensible input. Yep. The way I view it is it's almost like a framework, and there's a variety of different ways that it could be. You could
totally. Okay, now I understand your question. Yep. Yeah. Okay. I would say it is more methody than it is frameworky. Got it. But I think that the framework part is really important. That's one of the things I wanted to sort of get towards, is that instead of saying just do this, like just do this is in the book, like in little areas of the book, the majority of the book is here's how we learn. Here's the neuroscience of learning. And here's how language is formed, and here's how that fits in with neuroscience. And with those two parameters of this is how language works and this is how our brains work, these are my conclusions of how I think is an optimal route through this thing. But if you come up with a better way that fits these two parameters, do it. Yeah. Go nuts. I think this is a good path to start on and iterate from there. And so I encourage development, and I want it because I want to be able to go faster. And like the method has actually changed substantially over the last few years. And there's like a page on my website in terms of changes that have, like any of the, if you go to a link on my website that's come from the book, it'll have a big thing on top saying, oh, you just read the book, click here because things have changed. Because there are ways of optimizing this further than even the book did. But like, that shouldn't be the end. I hope that this will change dramatically in 2 years. But I do think it's a really solid starting point. And in terms of a lot of other approaches, I don't see them starting from neuroscience. I don't see them starting from how we actually learn and moving from there. I more get a sense of starting from kind of some sort of status quo of like, yeah, I went to high school and I had this experience. And then here's some tips. Here's some tips of ways and tweaking things, of ways of getting a little more efficiency here and there. But I'm not seeing a lot of let's start from how we learn and let's solve the problem. So I guess the thing that I feel that I want to see more of, honestly, is that I want to see more of, let's talk about the same thing. Let's talk about how do we deal with the pronunciation problem, or how do we deal with the memory problem, and then let's go from there. And those are discussions that I really would love to see more of, because I think that they would result in improvements to everyone's stuff.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So without, I don't want you to throw anyone under the bus, but like, are there, when you look at, from the different companies, apps, books, programs, there's a lot of them. There are, right?
Yeah.
I guess it's tough to answer, but I guess thinking just kind of rough as you're thinking through, if you had to break it on roughly on a percentage basis, to go like, what percentage you're going like, yeah, they're doing different stuff than I am, but they're doing a good job. Like maybe it's a different take, they're doing it differently, but it's like, yeah, I think they're doing good. Versus stuff you're going like, oh, I don't agree.
What category? You want to say just apps?
I guess so. We could go apps, or I mean, even wait, let's go one for apps, one for just programs, like maybe online programs or maybe courses.
Sure. Okay. If we're gonna go apps, I just haven't seen anything. I haven't
Okay.
seen anything. There's Rosetta that is non-translation based. I think almost without exception, everyone else is translation based, because that's how you make a product that's enjoyable to use, or at least that people are familiar with and doesn't terrify people. And as long as you have a translation based product, there is a ceiling right over your head. You cannot teach someone how to think in a new language if you're asking them to rehearse translation all day. Like I don't think it's doable. I think you're just going to keep running up against this thing, because you're training them to do a thing that they're trying not to do. Like they don't want to translate, and then every day you're like, come on, let's translate more. And so I find that really, really problematic. Rosetta is the only one that I've seen that tries to avoid translation, but because they're sort of forcing the content, they're not allowing the user to have some sort of choice in terms of the images they see, in terms of the words they want to learn, in terms of how they want to learn grammar. It also just the complete absence of explicit discussion of grammar. Rosetta runs into problems, significant problems, as soon as you get past simple vocabulary.
Right. So
So
basically majority of apps that you've seen anyway, maybe there's others you haven't seen, but from what you've seen,
probably, yeah.
maybe you don't fully align with, how they're choosing to tackle it.
I just feel like as long as you're in a translation model, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Got it. Okay.
And I get why they're doing it, and I nonetheless don't think it's going to get people to where they want to go.
Okay. How about on like maybe the program side of things, online programs or any courses?
I think there's a number that do really good stuff. I really love Glossica's approach of just exposing people to a ton of input, a really good input. That's super awesome. Mimic Method, Idaho's stuff is just like so cool.
Mm-hmm.
He goes into pronunciation even more than I do, and like we've talked about doing some courses and stuff together, because like when my quick fix thing of like just go through this 2-week program and you'll be done, when people want more than that, I'm like, well, I don't have time to do that. Go over to him. Like he's gonna like do such good work for you on that front. I use Skritter personally for my Japanese. I think they've done a really nice job of making actually apps. They fall in there. I thought they've done really good work. I've Wanikani. I tried to use. It was just too translation based for me. I got really frustrated, but I've heard people getting a lot of good use out of that. There's like a lot of good stuff out there.
Cool.
So yeah, I definitely am not anti-pro. Like people have put some really good work in, and made some really cool things.
That's good. No, I guess
Yeah.
that I was just really curious on your perspective going like, I was more wondering if your view on, let's call it the market of different programs is more like, oh man, most stuff is not very good, but it sounds like you're like, there's a lot of good stuff, and that's good to hear, because yeah, I think I
There
agree.
is. It's just I want to get away from translation, and it's
Yeah.
so hard to do so.
Got it. Cool.
It's one of the frustrating things with like Wanikani, where I'm like, I want to use this and I want to love it, and I just keep seeing all these English words, and it's like, damn it.
So I guess, how far how do I phrase this? How close is it to being released? Let's say that.
The new app. We will be seeing a demo of the whole, like the first 10 minutes that every user will experience by the end of May, which is most of the app. Like most of the app is sort of this flow, and so that flow will
right
be
now
done
it's
by
not
the end.
accessible. Like I couldn't download it, correct?
No, it's pre-orderable, and people can access the beta. But I mean, like in May, they will be able to access the early beta if they join the Indiegogo. The rest of the public will be able to join in August. But that the onboarding experience is going to be available in May. The first experience of really being able to just learn whatever you want and just delve in is going to be June. The first time that we're going to promise that all of those flashcards are not going to be deleted is July, just because I got warned by my devs. I'm like, we could change everything and it could be like $10,000 or $50,000 to migrate their information. So So that will be July that we finally say, okay, your flashcards are safe. Go create, and then August will be the actual release
Of this year.
of this year.
Coming up?
Oh, it's going fast. Yeah,
Coming up.
It's keeping me up at night.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. And let's see if there's, I guess without going, I don't want to take too much more of your time, but how does, I guess, what are a couple of ways that your app is solving some of the problems that we talked about? So for example, I guess let's put it this way. What are a couple of things that you're doing with your app that are taking your whole philosophy of how languages should be learned and implementing that in app form? What are a couple things that you're doing?
Sure. The pronunciation stuff is the first ingredient of the app. It just takes that 45-minute experience of installation and turns that down to 0. And so people are engaging with video lessons about pronunciation, short ones, but video lessons about it. Then they are learning the whole alphabet in any particular language, whether that be something like Spanish or something like Korean, as to how each character functions, as to how each combination of characters functions in producing sounds. And then also doing direct ear training of this sort of lake idea, except applied to each individual language. You know, Italian would be like caro and carro, things like that. So that part's taken care of right in the beginning. Word choice is about user choice. And so users get to decide what words they want to learn, as opposed to being forced to learn things like watermelon or apricot, where they're like, oh, it's fruit time. Like, no, you're going to learn what you want to learn. We have a recommended order. The order is intelligently chosen, so it's actually memorable instead of this sort of fruit thing and then numbers and then jobs, which is like dismal for memory. And so users will be able to choose both what words they want to learn and how they want to learn them. And so users are constantly choosing images to represent words or sentences that they can connect to any particular word, and have them in fill in the blank sentences with images, so that basically all of the flashcard content they create is immersive. It's all entirely in the target language. But the first time they see it, they will be able to look at translations and see what each word does in each sentence, things like that. And so as the user keeps progressing through the program learns what words you know, and you can swipe out words and say, I don't want to learn that word because I know it already, or I just don't care about that word. And the user builds the program builds a profile on each user, figures out what their vocabulary is, and will be able to suggest the words that they should learn next, based on frequency lists, and saying this is the most frequent word that you don't know yet. So learn that, and it'll connect that to a bunch of sentences that the user could learn. So it does a lot that is not, it just doesn't exist in other programs. Also just the idea of, I want to learn anything. I want to go learn this word that's in this particular like Harry Potter book. And you can type in a sentence from Harry Potter on our web app and use that to learn, magic wand. And that can be a flashcard. You can have images of magic wands, and like you can use this to learn whatever you want. It's self-directed learning all the way through. We have suggestions, but it's always up to the user as to which choices they want to make. And that much customization, that much ability to just decide, choose your own adventure through your language is, I haven't seen it. So and the idea of being able to keep it entirely in the target language. So you're not just memorizing translations. Like all that stuff doesn't exist, because if it did, then I wouldn't be staying up all night. And spending over $1 million on this thing. So yeah, no, I mean, I'm excited about this thing. This is the thing I wanted to have for myself since 2012.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap it up there, everyone. As per usual, when we have a guest, all of Gabe's links, or rather our guest links, are all in the description below, in the YouTube description. Any parting words? Anything you want to say before we finish up, Gabe?
No, I think that was fun. No.
Cool. Well, I'm going to end this live stream, and then let's click. Thanks for watching, everyone. Talk to you later.
Nice meeting y'all.